Why weren't all creatures included on Noah's Ark? While we often imagine a pair of every animal boarding the ark, there were actually several types of creatures that didn't need to be there. From sea life that could survive in the water to microorganisms that are naturally resilient, God had a plan for each part of creation. In this video, we'll explore the reasons why certain animals, like insects, large predators, and even mythical creatures, were left off the ark. Get ready to learn how practical considerations and divine wisdom shaped the decisions behind which creatures were saved. Now let's uncover the fascinating reasons behind this part of the Great Flood story. Aquatic life. Surviving the floodwaters. When thinking about the animals on Noah's Ark, it's easy to wonder why certain creatures, like fish and other sea life, weren't included. The reason is simple. These aquatic animals didn't need the protection of the ark. As the floodwaters rose and covered the earth, fish, whales, and other sea creatures were already adapted to life in water. They were able to survive the massive flood without any special help. The flood affected the land, but the water became a familiar environment for these creatures. They weren't in danger like the land animals were, and their natural habitat remained intact throughout the deluge. While Noah gathered pairs of land animals to protect them from the flood, God didn't need to make room for the creatures of the sea. They were safe where they were. This shows that God had a specific plan for each part of creation. Land animals needed the ark for survival, but aquatic life could continue on without disruption. It's a reminder of how God's wisdom covers every detail, even in the face of a world-altering event like the Great Flood. Insects and small invertebrates, self-sustaining populations. When it comes to insects and small invertebrates, you might wonder why they weren't specifically brought onto Noah's Ark. The truth is, these tiny creatures had their own ways of surviving the flood. Many of them could cling to floating debris, like pieces of wood or plants, which would have been scattered across the water during the flood. Others found refuge in the soil or within plants that weren't fully submerged. Their small size and ability to reproduce quickly meant they didn't need special protection like larger animals. Even after the floodwaters receded, these creatures would have been able to repopulate quickly, ensuring that they continued to thrive. Their resilience and adaptability made it unnecessary for Noah to gather them onto the ark. Insects and small invertebrates play an important role in the ecosystem, but their survival didn't rely on being inside the ark. Instead, they used the natural world around them to get through the flood. It's another example of how nature can find a way, even in the most extreme circumstances, and how God's plan ensured that every part of creation had what it needed to survive. Extinct species, natural selection, and extinction. When we think about the animals that didn't make it onto Noah's Ark, extinct species often come to mind. Some creatures that existed before the flood may have disappeared due to natural selection or environmental changes. These species weren't brought aboard the ark because they weren't considered essential for the world that would exist after the flood. God's plan for the ark was to preserve the animals that were necessary for the future ecosystem and for human survival. Some species may have served their purpose in the pre-flood world, but were no longer needed once the floodwaters receded. Over time, these creatures became extinct, either naturally or because their environment changed drastically after the flood. The story of Noah's Ark wasn't just about saving every single living thing. It was about protecting the species that would help rebuild life on Earth. The animals that weren't included on the ark didn't have a role to play in the new world, and their absence was part of the natural course of creation. This shows that God's plan is always purposeful, even when certain creatures are no longer part of the bigger picture. Unclean animals. Limited pairs for preservation. When God gave Noah instructions for the ark, there was a specific rule regarding clean and unclean animals. Noah was told to take 7 pairs of clean animals, but only 1 pair of unclean animals. This distinction wasn't random. It had a clear purpose. Clean animals were important for food and sacrifices after the flood, which is why they needed to be brought in larger numbers. In those times, clean animals were considered suitable for eating and for use in sacrifices to honor God. By bringing more of them aboard, Noah ensured that his family would have enough to eat and that they could continue offering sacrifices once the flood was over. On the other hand, unclean animals weren't meant for these purposes, so only a single pair was needed to preserve their species. This detail shows how God's instructions were precise and purposeful, thinking ahead to what would be needed once the floodwaters receded. The limited number of unclean animals was enough to keep their kind alive, but the focus was on preserving the animals that would be essential for human survival and worship in the post-flood world. Mythical creatures, symbolic representations. When it comes to mythical creatures like dragons or unicorns, you may wonder why they weren't part of Noah's Ark. The simple answer is that these creatures are often symbolic and not based on real animals. Mythical creatures have appeared in stories, art, and cultural traditions, but they weren't actual living beings that needed to be saved during the flood. These creatures often hold special meaning in various cultures and religions, representing different ideas or beliefs. For example, dragons are seen as powerful and mysterious in many ancient stories, while unicorns symbolize purity and grace. However, since they didn't exist in reality, there was no need to bring them aboard the ark. God's focus was on preserving the real animals that played an essential role in the world's ecosystems. The creatures on the ark were those that could physically survive and contribute to life after the flood. Mythical animals, though fascinating and meaningful in storytelling, were not part of that plan because they were more about symbolism than survival. Their absence highlights the difference between creatures of legend and the real living beings that were essential for the future of the earth. Large and dangerous animals. Practical limitations. Some of the large and dangerous animals, like certain dinosaurs or fierce predators, might not have been included on Noah's Ark for practical reasons. The Ark, while designed to hold many animals, had its limits. Space was needed for the survival of all the creatures on board, and adding massive or dangerous animals would have made it difficult to ensure the safety of everyone, including Noah's family. Animals like large predators could pose a serious threat to the other animals, creating dangerous conditions within the ark. Keeping such creatures under control in such close quarters would have been nearly impossible. God's instructions were focused on preserving the animals that were essential for repopulating the earth and ensuring that the ark remained a safe environment. By leaving out the large and dangerous species, God ensured that the balance of safety and space was maintained. These practical limitations highlight the careful thought behind God's plan, prioritizing the well-being of all who were aboard the ark. Microorganisms, natural resilience. When thinking about the creatures on Noah's Ark, microorganisms like bacteria and viruses might not come to mind. These tiny life forms didn't need a spot on the ark because of their incredible resilience. Unlike larger animals that needed shelter from the floodwaters, microorganisms are able to survive in extreme conditions, including the flood that covered the earth. Bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms can thrive in a variety of environments, from the soil to water to even inside other living creatures. Their ability to adapt and survive means they didn't require special protection on the ark. Even through the flood, these microorganisms could continue to exist, ensuring that life's smallest forms remained intact. God's plan for the ark focused on preserving larger species that needed the shelter and safety it provided. Microorganisms, with their natural resilience, were perfectly capable of surviving without needing any help. This shows the balance in creation. While some creatures needed protection, others were built to endure even the harshest conditions. As we've seen, not every creature was meant to be on Noah's Ark, and each decision had a purpose. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe to Holy Stories for more biblical tales and explanations. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more amazing stories from the Bible.